As always, sisters and brothers of direct African ancestry, our Cleveland Aboriginal ancestry, mothers of mothers, fathers of fathers, of humanity and of human civilization and culture, I greet you, as always, Amani Na Upendo. That's peace and love. Ma'at Hotep. Namaste. Namaskar. Shalom. Assalamu alaikum. Harambe. And Ubuntu. I'm Brother Mwanga Sadaka Mantu Nemsayu, and you have tuned in and connected with another episode of what's called at this time Purge and Purify Your Mind. Coming to you live from the backwoods, muddy waters, sugar ditches, swamps, dirt roads, cotton fields, railroad tracks, rattlesnake plantations, mockingbirds, and magnolia trees of Greenville and Delta, Mississippi. Our subject today is a brief look at and an expanded definition and meaning of what's called history. Not his story, not her story, but history, and what I personally call life studies. Before I do that, let me say a little something about the name of this program. Purge and purify your mind. Purge and purify your mind. To purge something is to eliminate and eradicate that which is hurtful, painful, harmful, poisonous, and undesirable. To purify is to cleanse and make free from impurities, defilements, adulterants, and pollutions. Therefore, mentally and psychologically speaking, to purge and purify your mind and our mind means to thoroughly eliminate and eradicate our minds of that which is hurtful, painful, harmful, poisonous, and undesirable, and cleanse and make our minds free of all impurities, defilements, adulterants, and pollutions. In this case, follow me, brothers and sisters, in this case of lies, ignorance, half-truths, false ideas, beliefs, and concepts, and so forth and so on. So what I'm getting at is that I'm using purge and purify, and really you can use one word, detox or detoxification, but from this point of view of this program, not from just a physical perspective, but psychologically, mentally, and spiritually. So, because we need to purge and purify our minds, our psychology, as I said, from all false ideas, beliefs, concepts, and ideals, mentally, psychologically, and spiritually, of the drugs of lies, the drugs of lies. Lies are drugs. False ideas, beliefs, ignorance, social engineering, social amnesia, mental side, cognitive dissonance, miseducation, double consciousness, brainwashing, Stockholm syndrome, the so-called Willie Lynch syndrome. Whether Willie Lynch lived or not, that's irrelevant. But the doctrine called the Willie Lynch syndrome, the book, the concepts and ideals expressed in that book, they are alive and they are working in our lives, in the lives of humanity, and especially so-called black humanity. The biblical book of Psalms 51 and 10 says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me." In spiritual, esoteric, and metaphysical terms, the word heart is referring to the deepest and innermost level of the so-called subconscious mind. Think over that. And with this episode, my intentions are to be quick but don't hurry. Be quick but don't hurry. So I'm trying to walk it down and talk in a language that we all can understand, and in terms that we all can understand, and to be quick and not hurry. With all the above being said, the etymological origin of the word history. And etymology itself, it simply means that the study of the meaning and origins and evolution of words, because words themselves have a history. So when I say the etymological origin of the word history, I'm looking at the word history in terms of its beginning and its evolution. So therefore, the etymological origin of the word history is derived from the so-called Greek word historia, Historia, historia. And historia essentially means to inquire, to investigate, to research, and look back into, to sift, turn over, weigh, analyze, and thoroughly and meticulously examine. In short, history means, as the biblical book of 1 Thessalonians, the 5th chapter, 21st verse informs us, prove all things, and hold fast to that which is good. To prove something, again, is synonymous to me with the word history. To prove something means, once again, to thoroughly examine, to look into, to research, to investigate, to analyze. So history and that biblical verse of 1 Thessalonians, prove all things, is synonymous. It didn't say believe everything. The verse said prove all things and hold fast to that which is good. To prove something. And then that which stands up to our testing, to our proving, then we hold fast to that. It goes beyond our belief system, what we have been told, how we have been socially engineered and programmed, whether we acknowledge it or not. And most times, too many of us, we are in denial that we have been miseducated, as Dr. Carter G. Woodson informed us when he wrote the so-called book, The Miseducation of the So-Called Negro. And he knew that there wasn't such a creature called Negro. But the title of the book is The Miseducation of the So-Called Negro. And he wrote the book in 1933. And the book is still in print. And the book is still relevant. And we have among our people who call themselves educators. And I hear it all the time and have conversations and dialogue and discussion with some of these people who claim to be educators, who have received their learning or training from the educational institutions of this society. And they are in the classroom and they are among so-called black children. But they know nothing, most of them know nothing about the information that Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote in the book, The Miseducation of the Negro. And those who have heard of the book, the educators that I'm referring to, and may have the book, they haven't even read the book or studied the book and tried to implement in the classroom, in the home, wherever, the information that Dr. Carter G. Woodson wrote and put in the contents of that classic book. Wow. But history, not his story or her story, or what I personally prefer to call life studies, is more than the exact remembrance and recall of names and tidbits of factual information concerning certain people, places, and outstanding personalities, dates and events of the so-called past. History is more than gathering and collecting old bones and ancient artifacts and storing and hiding them away in basements and dark chambers of stupendous and beautiful buildings. Moreover, history or life study is more than just the record or evidence of what humans has done or have done. Absolutely not. History is life itself. Think over that. History is life itself. And what I'm endeavoring to do on this episode is to give a more expanded definition and meaning of what history is. Of what history is. And I know we as a people, so-called black people, African people, Aboriginal people, Alkebulan people, we, in terms of consciousness today, many of us say our story as opposed to his story as we break the word up. But I'm not dealing with so much our story, his story, or her story. I'm trying to make the point and give an expanded, broader definition and meaning of the etymological meaning of the word history. That's what I'm doing. History is life itself. It's not something that exists outside of us. Believe that or not, know that or not. History and culture exist inside our minds and bodies, the minds and bodies of people. Great ancestor, scholar, warrior, and personal friend of mine, and probably a friend of millions of people around the world. He's an ancestor now. Dr. Amos N. Wilson informs us that, quote, if there were no people in the world, there would be no history in the world, no culture in the world. Culture and history dwells in us and inhabits our bodies. We reflect our history and we reproduce our history when that history becomes a part of us and is one with us. Therefore, history is not something that exists way back yonder. That's the Mississippi Delta slang, way back yonder. So history it doesn't exist way back yonder, over the hill, under the bridge, and so forth and so on. But believe it or not, we are the sum total of our individual history and collective history. And it is alive inside of us this very moment, creating our consciousness, shaping, molding, determining, and influencing our thoughts, feelings, emotions, and behavior. Each of us at this very moment is a living, walking, talking, breathing, divine cell of consciousness of history. In essence, history is the so-called past, present, and future. But the so-called past, present, and future are the eternal one, the eternal now. There's no separation between what we call the past, the present, and the future. And when, matter of fact, you just think about it. The past, present, and the future are just artificial creations by man and woman, really to give a sense of order to our so-called social living. But the so-called past is not past at all. And the so-called past, present, and future really just like mother, father, and child. They really one. Because think over this. Everything that we learn and everything that we know, right, in the so-called past, because we have breath of life right now, it's alive within us at this very moment. If we forgot all of what we have learned, all the lessons that we have learned, whether we're conscious of them or not, all the coping skills that we have learned in the so-called past, then we wouldn't be able to do most of the things that we're doing right now. So that, with that point, that's proof to me that what we call the past is alive and well within us at this very moment. We as so-called black people must study the accurate knowledge of our history because it is a living reflection of who we are, what we have achieved and accomplished, and more importantly, what we can do if we truly learn and constructively apply the knowledge and lessons that it teaches us. Not only our tragedies and defeats, but our triumphs and unlimited possibilities, potentialities, and capabilities. We should study our history, or the accurate knowledge of our history, because it is the greatest source from which self-knowledge, self-love, self-identity, self-reliance, self-discovery, and self-understanding comes. And at this time, I want to go back and mention something. And think about this. How can one truly love anything, self or anything outside of oneself, without accurate knowledge or self-knowledge? From the human perspective, in order to truly love, we must truly know. Think over that. And that is a biblical verse I like to say all the time, most time, and most of us have heard this verse. It says, love thy neighbor as thyself. And in this instance, neighbor is anybody or anything outside of oneself or other than oneself. So the premise of loving thy neighbor is self-love, right? And then, as I stated a second ago, it's a scientific, mathematical, spiritual impossibility to love self without the accurate knowledge of self. It's impossible. So in order to even love self, one must possess accurate self-knowledge. And when I say self-knowledge, I'm not just referring to our driver license, as a form of identification. I'm not referring to our social security card or our birth certificate or the school records, when we attended elementary school and, junior high and high school, or military records or medical records. And think over that. All those different forms of records, that's an aspect of the totality of our personal history. That's history. Those records are history. The medical records, the educational records, right? And so forth. Those are aspects of your personal history. But they are ingredients that make up the totality of who and what each of us are or is. An African proverb says, not to know is bad. Not to want to know is worse. Think over that. Meditate on that. Let us put that in our pipe and smoke that. Not to know, again, the quote is, not to know is bad. Not to want to know is worse. Moving right along. History, like a bottle of water, quenches our mental, intellectual, and spiritual thirst. As to some of you, I said a bottle of water, but you may think about a cold bud or something, a cold beer. But I'm using the comparison or the analogy of history with pure alkaline water. So history quenches our mental and intellectual thirst. From history, we receive our highest and most powerful inspiration for living, for peace, for power, for prosperity, for elevation, for liberation, for salvation, and for a heaven on earth, here and now. And I'm trying to make this episode sort of brief. And before I close out, I want to make a few quotes and to kind of stimulate and jog our memories, and then bring this short presentation to a close. And I'm not trying to do a 4-hour speech like some of our presenters do, and but just enough to stimulate our thoughts for understanding and to apply the information however we see fit in a positive, progressive way in our daily lives. And the motto that I've sort of been working with to go along with the program is goes something like enlightening minds, empowering people, enriching and transforming as many lives as possible for the better. So that's what these episodes are designed to do, to enlighten minds, empower people, enrich and transform as many lives as possible for the better, and to share relevant knowledge and information that is designed, as I stated in the beginning, to purge and purify our minds. And I know that our minds is a delicate area for discussion, but something has happened to our minds, and we need to have courage and inner convictions to, as Curtis Mayfield said in one of his old, so-called old songs, check out your mind. Because what we call our mind is the primary major tool that is supposed to be used to navigate through life, right? And our minds and our thinking, that's a spiritual phenomenon. Not just intellectual, but our minds is a gift of the divine, by whatever name we call the divine. It's a gift. And each and every one of us have a mind. And if you don't recognize and realize the power, potentiality of your own mind, something, someone, or something will take control of that mind. And that's the dilemma that the masses of humanity find ourselves in today. Because there's a, what I call wickedly wise, right, group of people. And this is a global phenomenon that is manipulating our mentality, the whole cultural, global cultural system is a power system. And even though we have people in position of authority, right, in these various institutions that make up a society, which is a system globally, but there's a small clique of people, and I call the wickedly wise, they have an agenda. And it's not the people that's in the position of authority, because they are hired hands also, from the president on down, a major institution and corporation. They are in cahoots, but there's a small clique, as I said, of people, of interlocking families on a global scale that have an agenda that's not in the best interest of the masses of humanity. Think over that. Think over that. And I think I'm recalling a verse in the book of Ephesians. I think it's the 6th chapter where it said, we fight not, against so-called flesh and blood, but what? Through what? Spiritual wickedness in high places. Spiritual wickedness in high places. And the spiritual wickedness is expressed through an agenda of those that I'm calling the wickedly wise. think over that. But a few quotes, moving right along. Here's a quote. One of our most esteemed scholars, ancestor now, Dr. John Henry Clark, and I knew him personally in New York. He lived in a brownstone up the street and around the corner from the avenue that I lived on. But Dr. John Henry Clark, here's a quote. He says, history, not his story, not her story, not our story this time, but the etymological meaning of the word history. History is a clock people use to tell their historical, cultural, and political time of day. It's a clock that people use to tell their historical, cultural, and political time of day. It's a compass that people use to find themselves on the map of human geography. History tells them where they have been, what they have been, where they are, and what they are. But most importantly, history tells the people where they still must go and what they still must become. The Most Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and here's a quote from the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and because I'm saying this, I'm not a card-carrying member of the Nation of Islam, and this on my head is not a kufi that's related or connected to the religion of Islam. This is a crown. It's all it is. And this attire that I have on is an African cultural attire. That's it. That's it. And you can look on some of the statues of ancient Kemet or Egypt with the pharaohs with various headdresses on, and those headdresses or crowns were worn thousands of years before any so-called Abrahamic religion, before Christianity, before Judaism, Hebrewism, before Islam. So this is a crown, right? And they suggest African spirituality, African culture. And we'll talk about it a little later on, probably on another episode, the difference between religion and spirituality, because religion and spirituality is not the same. What we call religion is an artificial formation, right? And it's used, whether you believe it or accept it or not. What we call religion is used politically for mind control and domination. It's not synonymous with spirituality. But when you check out your religion, check it out. Whatever religion whatever name you call it, whatever your belief system. But think about what I said earlier, prove all things. How did you acquire your religious belief? And we could talk about any belief, educationally, medically, male-female relationship, you name it. But at this time, how did you acquire your religious belief? Did you ever sit down growing up and investigated it, did comparative study and homework? Did you prove it? Did you test it? Did you weigh and sift? And then held fast to that which stood the test? Don't lie, because you didn't. None of us did. It was given to us in the home, through the society, social upbringing. And we fight today, and we argue and debate over something that 9 times out of 10 or 10 times out of 10, most of us, the majority of us, have never did any homework, have never did any proving, have never did any testing to see whether or not the religious belief or any belief is worthy of you having in your mentality, in your psychology, and trying to apply it to your daily life. You owe it to yourself. We owe it to ourselves, especially when we get up to an age of what we call responsibility, and we say that we grown men and grown women, and being grown has nothing to do with age. Because to be grown, that speaks of maturity. how are we moving towards our God self? That's to become grown and mature. Had nothing to do with age, because in the physical sense, we reach a point where our physical growth stops and begin to level off. But we still have our mentality and our psychology, and we should continue to grow. But if something or somebody has aborted our mental, psychological, and spiritual growth, then that means that we have impurities in our mind. We have a blockage in our minds. We have the blockage of false ideas, of lies, beliefs, concepts in our minds. So if we are to continue to grow mentally and become mature and so-called grown, as many of us use the word, then we must have the courage to purge and purify the impurities out of our mind and not be in denial. And most of us are in denial. I mean, it's just like a alcoholic or a drug addict. We see ourselves, that individual see themselves, look at themselves on a daily basis in the mirror. Some of us may not do, but you know yourself. So if we're in denial, or the alcoholic or the drug addict is in denial, then the healing process can never begin. The healing can never start. So regardless of how the addiction came and what form it may manifest and express itself, that's irrelevant. That's okay. But come out of the denial so that the healing can begin. And that's the purpose, the primary purpose of purge and purify your own mind. But the quote, I got sidetracked in my own self in a roundabout way. But the most honorable Elijah Muhammad, and most people attributed this quote partially to Malcolm X, but the fullness of the quote came from the honorable Elijah Muhammad, and it said, history is, above all our studies, the most attractive and best qualified to reward our research, as it develops the springs and motives of human actions and displays the consequences of circumstances which operate most powerfully on the destiny of human beings. Walter Kirchner, he was a historian, European historian. He says, history serves as more than a remembrance of times gone by and of past efforts of man. It serves as a guide for our actions which shape the future. It serves as a guide for our actions which serve the future, which shape the future. Dr. Amos Wilson, and I'm going to read a passage from his book, The Falsification of Consciousness, and I'm going to bring this little episode to an end. But he says there's a direct connection between history and economics. And that's to those of us who may ask the question, what does so-called history has to do with economics? What does it have to do with me making money? It has everything to do with it. When we really understand what history is in its most broadest sense, and just ask the question, if history doesn't have anything to do with economics and money and finance and power, then why did those who manipulated and rewrote the history, and especially our history or our story, in our own mind? Why did they distort it? Why was it twisted in our own minds, in our own psychology in which we are in denial of? Why was it twisted and rewrote if it has nothing to do with power, economic and finance and money? It has everything to do with it. We just need to understand that. Here's a quote. We were born in the past. We were formed in the past in order to understand how we think or what is going on around us in society, we must understand the things that went on in the so-called past. If you don't understand what was, how you going to, if you don't know what was, how you going to understand what is? It's impossible. Malcolm X, quote, and it's from a book, little pamphlet called Malcolm X on, at that time, what was called Afro-American history, but African history, or history of Africans in the Western Hemisphere. And the quote is this: when you deal with the past, you're dealing with history. This is Malcolm X. You're dealing actually with the origin of a thing, etymology. When you know the origin, you know the cause. If you don't know the origin, you don't know the cause. And if you don't know the cause, you don't know the reason. You're just cut off. You're left standing in midair. So the past, so-called past, deal with history, life studies, as I call it, life studies, or the origin of anything, the origin of a person, the origin of a nation, the origin of a people, the origin of an incident. And when you know the origin, then you get a better understanding of the causes that produce whatever originated there, and its reason for originating, and its reason for being. It's impossible for you and me, this Malcolm X continuing with his quote, it's impossible for you and me to have a balanced mind, a harmonic mind in this society without going into the past, the so-called past. He's saying past, but I'm saying so-called past of life studies, which is within us and is us right now at this moment. Whatever originated there and his reason for originating and his reason for being. It's impossible for you and I to have a balanced mind in this society without going into the past. Because in this particular society, as we function and fit into it right now, we are such an underdog. We are trampled upon. We are looked upon as almost nothing. Now, if we don't go into the past and find out how we got this way, we will think that we were always this way. And if you think that you were always with this way, in this condition that you're in right now, it's impossible for you to have too much confidence in yourself, in ourselves. You become worthless in your own mind and almost nothing. But when you go back into the past and find out where you once were, then you will know what you weren't always at this level, that you weren't always at this level. Pardon me, because I need to put my glasses on. But anyway, it's all good. I'm going to be quick, but don't hurry. And we had made great achievements, contributions to society and humanity, civilization and culture, science and so forth. And you know, if you once did it, pardon me. Let me put these glasses on. Still here. And if you know that if you once did it, you can do it again. You automatically get the incentive, the inspiration, and the energy necessary to duplicate what our foreparents formerly did. But by keeping you completely cut off from the past, from the knowledge of the past. It is easy for the so-called man who has power over us to make us willing to stay at this low level because we feel that we were always at this level, a low level. That's why I say it is so important for you and me to spend time today learning something about the so-called past so that we can better understand the present, analyze it, and do something about it. Dr. Amos Wilson, The Falsification of African Consciousness, Eurocentric Psychiatry and the Politics of White Supremacy. Get this book, powerful book from the beginning to the end, and you can make this, I'm recommending make this your first study in terms of what's called history and get an expanded definition and meaning of the word history, because not only does he deal with the expanded meaning and definition of history, but he goes into some subtopics like the history in economics, history in the manipulation of time, history in mythology. I mean, it's all in this book. History and power. Quote, Dr. Wilson, page 13. Therefore, think again when we celebrate Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, King, and others. We should begin to look at the central issues. If our study of so-called black history is merely an exercise in feeling good about ourselves, then we will die feeling good. We must look at the lessons that history teaches us. We must understand the tremendous value of the study of history for the regaining of power, If our education is not about gaining and regaining real power, we are being miseducated and misled, and we will die, quote unquote, educated and misled. End of quote, that quote. But I want to throw in real quickly that education, the primary purpose, in my opinion, of education is to ensure the biological existence of a people. If that so-called education does not ensure the biological existence of a people, then it's miseducation. It's miseducation. Now, I said the primary purpose. I didn't say it didn't have anything to do with you trying to get a job, a good job, a good title, have a career. I said the primary purpose of education among any people is to ensure or to help ensure the biological existence of that people. If that education does not do that, or is incapable of doing that, it's miseducation. It's miseducation, point blank. And education of any people is not a shoe that fit the foot of all people. True education among any people and every people is culturally based. There's no generic education that fit everybody or all ethnic groups. That's a lie. That's part of the deception. That's part of the tricknology. Let's think about it. Sit down sometime in quiet meditation and reflection and think about it. We got a lot of work to do. The study of history, quote, the study of history cannot be a mere celebration of those who struggle on our behalf. We must be instructed by history and should transform history into concrete reality, into planning and development, into the construction of power and the ability to ensure our survival as a people. If not, so-called black history or any other form of history becomes an exercise in the inflation of egos. It becomes an exercise that cuts us further off from reality. Ironically, we now see even more people who are not our friends joining us in this celebration, which means that they must see in it some means of protecting their own interests and see in it something that works for them and possibly against us. If they can celebrate our history and see it as something positive, then it means that we are not using it in a revolutionary sense. And revolution here, I'm just interjecting, the word revolution, don't run from that, because you read and probably have books called Revolutionary Diet, a revolution in education, a revolution in this. The word revolution simply means a total and complete positive and progressive change. That's all it means. A total, complete, positive, and progressive change. I didn't say nothing about picking up no gun. That's how we've been tricked. That's how we've been tricked. Revolution. Again, Total, complete, and positive progressive change. That's it. They do not see our study of it as a threat to their power. If we are not studying it in a way that it is a threat to their power, then we are studying it incorrectly. And our celebration of it is helping to maintain us in a state of deception. So let us make sure that we look at and study history in a light such that it advances our interests and not inflate our egos and blinds us to reality. So, with all that being said, and I think we need at this time bring this episode to an end, and that's just what we're going to do. The naked truth is always better than the best dressed lie. Not to know is bad. Not to want to know is worse. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. Every shut eye isn't closed, and every goodbye isn't gone. Everything must change. Nothing stays the same. Everyone will change. No one stays the same. The young becomes the old, and mysteries do unfold, because that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. There are not many things in life you can be sure of, except rain comes from the clouds, sun lights up the sky, and hummingbirds do fly. Winter turns into spring. A wounded heart will heal. A wounded heart will heal, but never much too soon. Yes, everything will change. The young becomes the old, and mysteries do unfold, because that's the way of time. Nothing and no one goes unchanged. There are not many things in life you can be sure of, except what I just said. And finally, brothers and sisters, thank you for joining us. We connecting on this episode, and I hope some of what has been stated or shared will make a positive, progressive impact on your individual and family and community life. Do not believe in anything simply because you have heard it. Do not believe in anything simply because it is spoken and rumored by many. Do not believe in anything simply because it is found written in your religious books. Do not believe in anything merely on the authority of your teachers and elders. Do not believe in traditions because they have been handed down for many generations. But after observation and analysis, when you find that anything and all things agree with reason, critical thinking, and is conducive to the good and benefit of one and all, then accept it and live up to it. Finally, all for one and one for all. Peace and love. Until next time.